China today rolled out the red carpet for Russian President Vladimir Putin, who is on a two-day state visit to the country that has emerged as one of Moscow's closest strategic allies, especially since the Russian invasion of Ukraine began over 2 years ago. Chinese President Xi Jinping and his Russian counterpart pledged to deepen their strategic partnership when they met in Beijing today, in a stark show of their growing alignment as Moscow's troops advance in Ukraine. Putin, whose delegation includes top defense and security officials, was welcomed by Xi Jinping to Beijing's Great Hall of the People with full military pageantry. A joint statement released by the two leaders laid out their country's alignment on a host of issues, including energy, trade, security and geopolitics, with specific references to Ukraine, Taiwan and the conflict in the Middle East. The visit, Putin's symbolic first overseas trip since starting a new term as Russia's president last week, is the latest sign of strengthening bilateral ties as the two leaders bring their countries closer in the face of heavy friction with the West. The statement proclaimed that China-Russia relations have stood the test of rapid changes in the world, demonstrating strength and stability, and are experiencing the best period in their history. The two leaders called each other priority partners. Putin, whose country's economy has become increasingly reliant on China since his February 2022 invasion of Ukraine, hailed the two countries' practical cooperation in his meetings with Xi, noting their record bilateral trade last year while stressing the importance of bolstering energy, industrial and agricultural cooperation. This meeting was Putin and Xi's fourth time speaking face-to-face since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine. And just weeks prior to the beginning of the war, Russia and China had declared a no-limits partnership on the sidelines of the Winter Olympics in Beijing. This state visit comes amid mounting international concern about the direction of the war in Ukraine, amid delays in the delivery of aid and weapons to Kiev, and as Russia's economy and defense complex appears largely unscathed by Western sanctions. US officials say the resilience displayed by the Russian economy in the face of the sanctions is largely thanks to Chinese support. Putin says he and his Chinese counterpart will discuss the war in Ukraine in informal talks later today. Russia's newly appointed Defence Minister, Andrei Belousov, and his predecessor, Sergei Shoigu, who is now Secretary of Russia's Security Council, are expected to be in attendance. Putin's red carpet welcome in Beijing comes a day after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that he was cancelling all his upcoming international visits as his troops defend against a surprise Russian offensive in his country's northeastern Kharkiv region. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in Kiev just yesterday to reaffirm the Biden administration's support for Ukraine after months of congressional delay in approving American military aid to the embattled country. Blinken pledged $2 billion in foreign military financing and said some much-needed ammunition and weapons are being rushed to the front lines. Pressure has also been mounting on Xi Jinping from both the United States and Europe to ensure that soaring exports from China to Russia since the start of the war are not propping up the Kremlin's war effort. White House officials in recent weeks have confronted Beijing on what they believe is substantial support for Russia's defense industrial base in the form of goods like machine tools, drone and turbojet engines and microelectronics exported from China. Beijing, for its part, has slammed the US and accused it of making groundless accusations over normal trade and economic exchanges between China and Russia. But for all the denials of Western allegations, fact is Beijing has never condemned Russia's invasion. Rather, it claims neutrality in the conflict and has released a vaguely articulated 12-point position on its resolution. Ahead of an expected peace conference in Switzerland next month, Xi has called for peace talks that take both sides' positions into account. Today, Russia said in the joint statement that it welcomed the readiness of China to play a constructive role in the political and diplomatic settlement of the conflict, and that it is necessary to eliminate its root causes and adhere to the principle of the indivisibility of security, in an apparent reference to their shared view that NATO is responsible for the conflict in Ukraine. This week's visit marks the two leaders' 43rd meeting in the more than 1 decade that Xi Jinping has been in power. Xi and Putin, known for their close personal chemistry, have steadily expanded their countries' diplomatic coordination and economic and security cooperation, as both have faced mounting frictions with the US and its allies. Even as Xi seeks to repair frayed ties with Europe and stabilize his country's ties with the United States, he is widely seen as unwilling to sacrifice his partnership with Putin, who the Chinese leader sees as an indispensable partner in reshaping a world order which both believe is unfairly dominated by the US and are seeking to contain them. This shared worldview was on display today as Xi Jinping, speaking alongside Vladimir Putin, slammed a lingering Cold War mentality, as he put it, and said, unilateral hegemony, camp confrontations and power politics threaten world peace and security of every country. The two leaders said they will deepen trust and cooperation in the military field by expanding the scope of joint exercises and combat training, regularly conducting joint sea and air patrols, and improving the capabilities and level of joint response to challenges and threats. Putin agreed with Xi's concerns about rising engagement between NATO and like-minded countries in Asia, calling for a reliable and adequate architecture of security in the Asia-Pacific region, in which there will be no place for closed military political alliances. We think the creation of such alliances is counterproductive and harmful, Putin said. In the statement, the two countries also expressed very deep concern over what they describe as US military activity with allies that have a clear anti-Russia and anti-China orientation, calling the actions extremely destabilizing. Putin and Xi reaffirmed that there can be no winners in a nuclear war and it should never be fought. Analysts say it's not surprising that the Russian leader has chosen China as his first foreign trip since he was sworn in for a 5th presidential term last week. The 2-day state visit comes as their relationship reached its highest level ever. That's what he told the Chinese state media. Putin spoke of his interest in Chinese martial arts and philosophy and said some of his family are actually learning Mandarin. He added, in the face of a difficult international situation, our relations are still strengthening. But with the West growing increasingly impatient with the Russia-China alliance, Xi Jinping's hopes of playing peacekeeper so far unsuccessful. Analysts say the Chinese president will perhaps need to calibrate the risk of continuing to stand shoulder to shoulder with an international pariah who has in the past been described by him as a comrade and his dear friend. Needless to say, the West will keep a hawk's eye on this alliance. The question is, can it reshape the world order in keeping with the larger ambitions harbored by Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping?